Many Jews today feel the need for a Jewish renaissance. People are searching for a more vital and authentic mode of Jewish expression, and more than ever we need to shift not only physically but spiritually out of exile mode. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
The Rabbi has discussed the question of correct pronunciation of the Hebrew language. Is there an halachic aspect to one's pronunciation of Hebrew?
The Shulhan Arukh, in more than one place, refers to correct pronunciation of Hebrew as a requirement, as an halachic requirement. For example, in Bar-Hayim, Siman Samech Aleph, regarding reciting Kriyat Shema. As we all know, the Mishnah itself already discusses the requirement of being medakdek be'othotheha, in other words, pronouncing Kriyat Shema precisely and correctly. And one thing the Shulhan Arukh writes in Siman Samech Aleph, Seif Waw, is that one is required to pronounce the Daled in the word Ehad, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Ehad. One is required to laharich bedaled, to stretch out, to extend the pronunciation of the last letter, which is a daled, which is something, of course, that one can do if one pronounces it correctly, as a daled refuya, as a daled without a dot, which is a the, as in the English, the definite article in English, the, the. And if one says one has breath, one can say ahad for quite some time. And whilst one pronounces that daled in an extended fashion, one is supposed to have the kavanah that Hashem is in control of the heavens and the earth and all places at all times, etc. If one pronounces that letter daled as a daled derusha, which is a d in English, a plosive sound, that by definition cannot be extended. The moment you pronounce the d by expelling the air from one's mouth, you say d with the tongue behind the front teeth, then the sound is over as soon as it is pronounced, and it cannot be lengthened in any way. So that is one example of an halachic requirement explicitly mentioned in the Shulhan Arukh, which, by the way, the Rama in no way contests. So the Ashkenazim can't claim that the al-minhag is not to do so, not based on what the Shulhan Arukh says at any rate. Another example from the same Siman, Samech Aleph, in Seif Tet Zayin, the Shulhan Arukh states that one is required to, when saying the last words of the second parasha of Kriyat Shema, Asher Nishba' Adonai, one is to stop after the word Nishba' and in order to pronounce the ayin correctly, Lahat'im et ha'ayin, as the Shulhan Arukh writes, before continuing on to the next word, which is Ladonai, Shem Hashem, Asher Nishba' Adonai La'avotechem. So here too, one is required to pronounce the ayin in the word Nishba' correctly, and not, as some people unfortunately do, as the Shulhan Arukh explicitly mentions, they say Nishba', which is like Nun Shin Beth He, as if the word is written with a He at the end, which means Asher Nishba' Hashem, Has Shalom, would mean that Hashem is taken captive, is captured. And that, of course, is sacrilegious and incorrect and a very serious issue. And something which the Shulhan Arukh explicitly refers to. So here too we have an explicit example of pronunciation of Hebrew being a critical matter which is defined in halachic terms. And here too the Rama does not mention that it is the custom of the Ashkenazim to do otherwise. So one cannot claim that there are no halachic parameters and no halachic aspects to this question of Hebrew pronunciation. Another quote also comes to mind, another quote from the Shulhan Arukh that one could mention here, and that is from Siman Kaf He, where the Shulhan Arukh writes regarding the putting on of tefillin. He writes that one should be careful to pronounce the bracha on the shel yad according to the standard nusach of that bracha, which is lahaniach tefillin. That is, he says, one must pronounce it with a chomes under the hey, lahaniach, not lahaniach. And this, by the way, is a very interesting point, because here we see that Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulhan Arukh, who was Sfaradi, as is well known, was apparently aware of and was able to distinguish between patah, an a, and chomes, which is an a, as we have described. And he considered the mispronunciation or the interchanging of these vowels, the patah and the chomes, to be a mistake. And in the case of the bracha, lahaniach tefillin, as the Aharonim point out, there is a difference in meaning. If one says lahaniach with a chomes, the meaning of the word is to place or to put. Therefore, lahaniach tefillin is to place or to put tefillin on one's arm. But if one says lahaniach with a patah, it means to let go, to relinquish something, to leave something alone, lahaniach, which is quite incorrect. So there is a difference in meaning, as pointed out by many poskim, including the Mishnah Brura on that seif. So again, we see that this statement of the Shulhan Aruch in Siman Kaf He Seif Zayin is a clear indication that there are halachic parameters when it comes to the pronunciation of Hebrew, and these things do in fact matter.
Despite the sources that the rabbi just cited, is it not true that the vast majority of leading Ashkenazi Haredi rabbis do not pronounce Hebrew as required by the Shulchan Aruch, even during Kriyat Shema? Furthermore, is it not true that the immediate ancestors of most Jews alive today did not pronounce Hebrew in this way? Are we not required to continue the customary pronunciation of our forefathers?
You're absolutely right regarding the vast majority of leading Ashkenazi Haredi rabbis, but it's equally true to point out and to place all the facts on the table that this has very little to do specifically with this or that type of community, or this or that hashkafa, there's this or that approach to Judaism, because the same thing can be said about the vast majority of leading rabbis in the so-called religious Zionist world, or the Dati Leumi world, or modern Orthodox world, or whatever, use whatever term you choose, and also perhaps depends on which country you live in and the precise type of individual to whom you refer. But the point is that it's not only Haredi rabbis who mispronounce Hebrew as a matter of course and seem not to care. Many also perhaps do not know many of these things that we have discussed in these interviews, but it is true, equally true, that rabbis from all sectors, all areas of the Jewish world, of the Torah world, from different ideological positions, they, as a matter of course, tend to mispronounce. They and their followers tend to mispronounce Hebrew systematically. The different groups have different pronunciations, but all these pronunciations are lacking. One is lacking in this detail and not in another, and perhaps the other pronunciation is better in one respect and not as correct in another respect. But there seems to be, it is true, that there seems to be total lack of regard for these matters and their importance. And it is not true that this is only my understanding or my view of the matter, because I'd like to mention here the haskama, the approbation given by a very great Chacham, a very great Rav, Harav Yaakov Kaminetsky Zitzal, who is certainly not suspect in terms of being of a Zionist religious or overly right-wing Eretz Yisrael persuasion, shall we say. He was from the, what one would call the American Haredi camp, I think one could describe it that way. I believe he was from Europe originally. He was widely understood and recognized to be a great Torah authority, and he gave a haskama to a book called Safa Berura. This was a book written by a certain Ashkenazi Tamid Chachamim here in Yerushalayim many years ago. And in this Haskama, he expresses his view that this book that this person wrote is very important, and he explains why. And I'd like to read a few quotes from this approbation. He begins by saying that I know that some people will not recognize the need or appreciate this book that you have written, but he says, Hashuv me'od levarer ad ha'emet. It is very important, he says, to clarify and discover the truth of this matter, as with any matter in the Torah. And then he goes on to say, he says, I once had a conversation with a certain person who said to me, what is this, all this talk about correct pronunciation? Do you imagine that the Baal Hidushei Harim was not Mekayim the Mitzvah of Kriyat Shema Ketikuna? Do you imagine that the Baal Hidushei Harim was one of the Rabbis of the Gura Hasidim? And this person mentioned to Rav Kamenetsky, do you claim, or is anyone claiming that he was not yet said the Hava Kriyat Shema correctly? And Rav Kamenetsky replies, and he says as follows, Ani amarti lo, ha wadai sheyasa b'di'avad. It is certainly true that he was Yotzei the Hava Kriyat Shema b'di'avad, because the Halakha is that if one mispronounces Kriyat Shema, one is also Yotzei the Hava. In other words, the Miswa is performed, but that is not how one would like to perform something. That is not how one should perform something if one has any choice in the matter. And he goes on to say, even though many people will not accept what you write, even if only a few do, he says, Aval im ahadim yikabelum gam ken kedai. It is worth printing the book, even for the few who will listen and who will understand that you are clarifying and defining the truth of the matter of the Torah and of the Hebrew language, and this is something of great value, he says. So what do we see? What can we understand from this Haskama of Rav Kamenetsky Zal? We see that first of all he considers the truth, just the very fact that it is part of studying Torah and part of being a serious Jew to want to know the truth and to do one's best to achieve that truth. This itself is a very important concern. It's something that should be of importance, it should matter to every one of us. Furthermore, Rav Kamenetsky says, yes, it's entirely true. Many of our immediate ancestors in the generations close to our own time in the past were not able, for different reasons, to pronounce Hebrew properly. They only were able to pronounce what they knew, that which was known to them, that which they had been taught in school, that which they had heard from other people in their communities. And very often, as we know today, for many reasons, this was not correct, but they had no choice. And if a person is anus, if a person has no possibility of discovering the truth, then of course he is mekayim the miswa b'di'avad. Of course he is considered to have performed the miswa to the best of his ability, and that is acceptable before Hashem without a doubt. But if one knows the truth, if one is able to ascertain that truth and act upon it, and it is certainly true that most people are able today to ascertain the truth if they wish to know this truth. And they are also able, if they want to, if they truly want to, they are able to act upon this truth. They are able to change their pronunciation if they put their minds to it, if they consider the matter to be of importance and of significance, then one is required to do so. That is Rav Kamenetsky's position. And therefore he says, yes, it's quite possible. He says, I don't know exactly how the Baal Hidushei Harim, the Rebbe Migur, pronounced Hebrew. One can guess perhaps, but he says, I don't know, I didn't know him, but if he mispronounced it as we assume, then yes, he was Yotzei b'di'avad, not lechatchila. That was not the normative and ideal way that one is supposed to perform that miswa of Kriyat Shema. And this is true, of course, for other aspects of Torah study as well. Reading Kriyat Shema is in fact just reading certain parashiyot from the Torah. In the Shulhan Arukh, the Shulhan Arukh and the Rabbi point out that it is correct to pronounce Hebrew correctly, not just during Kriyat Shema, but during all parts of Tefillah. And the Ramah adds even when studying Tanakh, for example, any part of the Tanakh. And if one goes that far, I would even go a little bit further and say, why, if it is proper to pronounce the Tanakh correctly, why is it not proper to pronounce the Mishnah correctly, for example? And even though the Talmud is partly in Hebrew and partly in Aramaic, one could ask the same question about the Talmud. Why is it not proper, if possible, if one is at all able to do so, why is it not possible, proper rather, to pronounce the Talmud correctly? So we see that Rav Kamenetsky did not accept this position, this commonly held view that that which is by definition correct. That if this is how we pronounce things nowadays, as if this is what my grandfather or his grandfather pronounced and said, then this is what Hashem wants us to be doing, and this was intended by Hashem that it should be so, and we should have no aim to change things. It should not be our goal to make any change to what is. This is something that Rav Kamenetsky apparently did not accept, even though you can hear this argument from many people nowadays. And I do recall having a conversation with a certain young yeshiva student, and we got onto the topic of the pronunciation of Hebrew, and I explained to him what I knew on the subject, and he listened with great interest, and he said to me afterwards, what you say is very enlightening, and I'm sure in fact that you're correct, but unfortunately I can't do so. And I asked him why not, and he said, because I'm required according to Halakha to pronounce Hebrew as my father and grandfather pronounced Hebrew. And I of course explained to him this was not true, and we see from this Haskama of Rav Kamenetsky that he also thought this was not true, entirely untrue. And when we understand, when we know that our forefathers, with regards to certain things such as Hebrew pronunciation, were unable to know the truth and were unable to act upon that truth, this does not change the mispronunciation or the misunderstanding of a certain aspect of the Torah, or the mistaken performance of a mitzvah, shall we say, or the lack of performance of a certain mitzvah. These things do not become the new Torah standard. If we understand there is a problem and how this problem came about, it is our task, it is part of our job description, if you like, as serious Torah Jews, to make the necessary changes.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.